They say every town has its secrets. Ours had a man who lived on the edge of the woods. His house, a sagging thing of rotting timber and curtains that never opened, always smelled faintly of iron when the wind shifted. Children crossed the street to avoid walking by it, though no one could explain why. He never waved. He never smiled. He simply watched. His name was Elias Mercer. No one really knew what he did for a living. He claimed to be a clockmaker, though no one ever saw a clock repaired or sold from his workshop. Still, at night, the faint ticking of dozens, maybe hundreds of clocks could be heard from inside. It was rhythmic, hypnotic, almost like a heartbeat stretched across the walls of his home. But the truth was darker. Far darker. Elias didn't collect clocks. He collected silence. The first girl to vanish was only 8. Her name was Clara Henson, and she had hair the color of wheat in summer. She disappeared walking home from school. No trace, no struggle, just gone. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Then the posters were taken down, her name whispered only in past tense. But Elias remembered her. He remembered every sound she made. For Elias believed that silence, pure silence, could only be created by extinguishing the last breath of a living thing. And so he hunted it. Not for blood, not for flesh, but for the instant between the scream and the nothingness that followed. That instant, to him, was sacred. Inside his basement, he built a collection. Not of bones, not of trophies, but of recordings. Each victim's final gasp, each stuttered plea, each cry for mercy captured on delicate reels of magnetic tape. Hundreds of them, labeled with names and dates in meticulous handwriting. And between the static, if you listened long enough, you could almost hear Elias breathing. Clara's reel was labeled June 12, 1989, and it was the first. They say serial killers refine their craft over time, and Elias was no exception. At first, his crimes were clumsy, almost careless, but with every silence he harvested, he grew more careful, more patient. He studied the rhythms of his victims, luring them not with threats but with curiosity. A toy left on a sidewalk, a voice calling from the woods, a dog's bark that wasn't really a dog. By the time suspicion crept toward his door, it was too late. He had become invisible, blending into the town like mold in the corners of an old house. Always there, always growing, always unnoticed. The police searched, of course. They combed the woods, dragged the rivers, even knocked on Elias's door. He welcomed them with calm eyes and offered tea that no one ever drank. They looked around. They saw nothing. The clocks ticked. The air smelled faintly of metal. And when they left, Elias locked the door and smiled into the shadows. Because downstairs, below their boots, his collection waited. The reels multiplied, each labeled, each cherished. His favorite was always the same, the moment just before the end, that fragile second when hope cracks, when fear sharpens into inevitability. That sound, he said, was purer than any clock's ticking. Years passed. Children grew up and moved away. Parents grew old and tired of grieving. The missing were carved into plaques and gravestones, memorialized in candlelight vigils, forgotten by everyone except Elias. He remembered every detail. He whispered their names as he dusted the reels, pressed play when the nights were too quiet. One by one, the tapes whispered back. Then came the night the house burned. No one knew how it started. Some said lightning. Others swore they saw Elias strike a match himself, standing calmly as the flames swallowed the windows. Fire crews arrived too late. The house collapsed in on itself, sparks devouring the sky. Elias's body was never found, but when the smoke cleared, they discovered something. A metal cabinet, scorched but intact, buried deep in the ruins. Inside, 100 reels of tape, each labeled with a name long missing from the town's memory. The officers listened to one. Only one. And they never played another. What they heard was not just a scream, not just a sob, but something worse. A voice. Elias's voice. Whispering between the cracks of static. Whispering as though he knew someone, someday, would listen. He said, "The silence lives here now, and it will wait for you." The cabinet was locked away, stored in evidence that no officer dared to touch. Some say it still sits there, humming faintly, like the ticking of clocks inside a coffin. Others say Elias survived the fire, that he walks the edges of the woods, waiting, collecting, listening, that the tapes are not dead objects, but living things, that every time one is played, the silence grows hungrier. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the town is asleep and the air is still, you can hear it, a click, a hiss of static, and the sound of someone breathing right behind you. It always began with the phone. A single ring in the middle of the night, sharp and shrill, cutting through the silence. People who answered said the same thing. At first, nothing but static. Then, faint breathing. And finally, a voice. A man's voice, calm, almost soothing, asking the same question every time. "Do you know what time it is?" The answer didn't matter. He always told them. "It's 3, 7, and then he hung up. At first, no one thought much of it. A prank caller, maybe. A weirdo with a phone list. But then, a pattern emerged. Everyone who received the call was found dead within 48 hours. No break-ins, no signs of struggle. Just bodies in their homes, eyes wide open, mouths slack, phones left dangling from their cords. The coroner always wrote the same word on the report, cardiac arrest. But the victims were young, healthy, too healthy to simply die. The papers called him the caller. Detectives worked around the clock, tracing numbers, pulling phone records, interviewing anyone who might have heard his voice. But the lines were always scrambled, the signal distorted, bouncing between towers like a ghost. No call could ever be traced back. And still, every few weeks, at exactly 7 a.m., another phone would ring. The victims had nothing in common. A teacher, a truck driver, a nurse, a teenage boy, a retired priest. No shared workplaces, no shared routines, only the call. Some tried to ignore it. They unplugged their phones, turned off the ringer, smashed the receivers against the wall. But when the time came, the call always found them, even on disconnected lines, even on cell phones with no service. Ring, breathing. "Do you know what time it is?" Fear began to spread. People set alarms for 3, 6, just to be awake before the phone rang. Some fled their homes entirely, choosing to wait in cars, motels, or even church pews. But it made a new difference. If the caller wanted you, the phone would ring. Detectives grew restless. One volunteered to answer when the call came through a tapped line. He held the phone steady, introduced himself, tried to coax the voice on the other end into conversation. But the caller only asked the question, "Do you know what time it is?" The detective refused to answer. For nearly a full minute, there was silence. Then the voice whispered, almost lovingly, "It's time for you." 2 days later, the detective was dead in his bed. Heart failure. 35 years old. The department stopped talking about it openly. They buried the files. No one wanted their number in the case log. No one wanted to touch the evidence. It became a ghost story, whispered only in bars and locker rooms, a warning more than an investigation. Years passed. The calls slowed. Some said he was gone, maybe caught, maybe dead. But the families of the victims knew better. Their phones never rang again, but sometimes, late at night, the static of a dead channel on a TV would swell, just for a moment, before fading into black. And then, one night, decades later, the line came alive again. A woman in her 50s, living alone, received the call. She thought it was a joke at first, some urban legend come back to life. But when she answered, her blood ran cold. The static, the breathing, the voice. "Do you know what time it is?" She froze, The voice sounded unchanged, not older, not younger. The exact same calm, patient cadence described in every police file. Like he'd been waiting, untouched by time. Her clock read 3:07. She didn't answer. The silence on the other end stretched, heavy, unbearable. Then, finally, a laugh. Not loud, not harsh, just a single chuckle, like someone amused by a private joke. And then, the line went dead. 2 days later, her neighbors found her body in the kitchen. Eyes wide, mouth slack, phone lying in a pool of spilled tea. The cause of death, cardiac arrest. The caller had returned. Now, investigators whisper that the pattern was never random, that every victim's address, if marked on a map, forms a line, and that line, stretched across counties and decades, is not finished yet, because it keeps going, town to town, home to home, drawing something none of them want to see completed. And if your phone ever rings at 7 a.m., you'll hear it too. The static, the breathing, the question. Do you know what time it is?